Today, it is such a pleasure to present another one of our author talks, and it's a very special treat for everyone to have a chance to talk to one of Buffalo's favorite writers, Margaret Sullivan. And Margaret is scheduled, and we are still very much hoping that this will take place at the end of August to speak here about her new book, which she will talk about. We'll plan to have that under the boardwalk. I'm really confident that we'll be able to still do this event. But Margaret graciously agreed to chat now in our Larkin in the Living Room series, just to give you a little preview of what she's been working on. I know so many of you know her, but to give you a little bit of background, here I have the papers right here. Margaret was the first woman managing editor of the Buffalo News. She grew up in Buffalo and worked her way up through her newspaper career at the News. Then she went to the New York Times as their public editor, and for the last several years she's been the media columnist, writing a media column for the Washington Post, and she's really become the media spokesperson for the country in many ways. And so we'll talk a little bit about that too. Margaret, welcome.
Thank you so much. That was my history in print. I like that. That was fun.
How are you doing? So you are in New York City. You've been there since the beginning of the COVID-19, and tell us what it's like there and how you are doing personally.
Right. Well, so I live in Manhattan, and I decided, even though my family has a cottage on Lake Erie, not too far from Larkinville. And I did think about kind of decamping and coming there, but I decided to stay in New York, and it's been fine. I've been just trying to be really careful, mostly staying home, walking in Central Park with some friends. And, it really is, it's a scary time. And it's really important to take it seriously and be responsible. And I feel like New Yorkers are doing that, and yet we are in the epicenter of the pandemic. So it's quite a historic moment for sure.
And you have been always able to, in this new capacity, able to write from home, which I know you have been doing. And it seems like everything around us, whether it's politics or the COVID-19, it all ends up relating to the media, as we're all glued in a new way to our newspapers, our television news. Maybe touch on how you've been approaching interviews and writing right now in this time of sheltering in place.
Right. So, when I've been in New York, sometimes I have worked from home, but also the Washington Post has an office in Manhattan, and I would go in there on a regular basis, but I haven't been doing that. So now I really have, turned my apartment into a home office fully. Just to give you an example, a lot of times I'm writing kind of opinion pieces that don't require, I can do my interviews by phone or by Zoom, whatever it may be. But the other day I went to do an interview with David Muir from ABC because World News Tonight, which is the half-hour show in the evening, has become the most watched program on TV, whether cable, broadcast, whatever you got. Which is, pretty notable. So I had an interview with David Muir, and, the question was, where were we going to do this? And I wanted to go into the studio at ABC, but they decided that would be too dangerous. So we ended up sitting on park benches just outside Central Park on Central Park West, and we both had masks on, and it really was like, well, this is something that I've never done before. We kept the socially distance, approved social distance of 6 feet between us, and it went fine, but it was pretty unusual.
What is the best way, and I think I know the answer to this, but for people to be able to follow read your columns in the Washington Post?
Well, we have, like so many news organizations, we have a paywall. So, you will run into that thing that says you can't read this. But we welcome new subscribers. Of course, I know that not everybody, if you live in Buffalo, you may not want to subscribe to something other than your local newspaper, but we would welcome you as a subscriber. And then I'm on Twitter. My handle is Sulliview, SULLIVIEW. So I tweet a lot. I'm on Facebook. And if you did go to the Washington Post homepage and just search my name, you would find my columns there. Sometimes they'll take the column and put it, on the homepage in a nice prominent position, but that doesn't always happen. So that's probably the best way. But I'm also very fortunate because the Buffalo News my former employer, and where I still have so many friends and former colleagues, has been publishing my column on a pretty regular basis on their editorial pages. So it is an opinion piece, and they run it on the so-called op-ed page, which is opposite of the editorial page where you see other columnists. And I have to say that I'm always so pleased and really thrilled to be able to be in the news, because it's, you know, I have such deep roots in Western New York, and I feel like it's a way of kind of communing with my home without actually being there. Also, I should mention, my son lives in downtown Buffalo. He's a lawyer, and my brother and his family live in Hamburg. So I have pretty widespread and deep roots, and of course my friendships, like with you, Leslie.
Wonderful. We'll put links in the blog post to your social media and to the Washington Post. I will give a shout out. I started subscribing, and I subscribe to the Buffalo News, I subscribe to the New York Times, and I love, it kind of rounds out my whole media experience because they're all different, and the Washington Post as well. Right.
Yeah, I think we all have something, you know, each one of my employers has something different to offer. So I think that's great, and I appreciate that so much.
Another Buffalo News connection is when we have you scheduled to speak in August. Mark Sommer, who many of you love as a writer in the Buffalo News, and was also a Larkin Square author last September, has graciously agreed to be in conversation with you. So that will be really nice, which leads us into, because I'm sure there'll be some interesting conversations between you and Mark on the local newspapers. Margaret, congratulations, you are on the final stages of your first book to be published, and we will put information about this. And by the way, you can pre-order the book through Talking Leaves, who we partner with on all these book talks. And I was just thinking, maybe we could arrange something if people pre-ordered the book, that you might be able to come in and sign them before they pick them up when you're.
I'd be thrilled. I'd love to do that. That would be great. And by the way, I'm very proud to have hired Mark Sommer quite a few years ago. So I was the features editor then, and I did hire him. So pleased about that. The book is about it's not a tremendously happy story, but I hope it has a hopeful element to it. It's about what's happened to the local news sort of whole ecosystem of local news in this country. I think a lot of people don't realize that local news has really been on the decline, not because there aren't great reporters and editors, but because the business model has really died off. With the coming of the internet, advertising, which was really our lifeblood of revenue, really dried up. And then, you know, people's changing habits have caused circulation to drop as well. And so the combination of those two things, particularly the advertising, has really been very detrimental to local news. And over the past 15 years or so, 2,000 local newspapers have actually gone out of business in the United States. And even the ones that are left sometimes are kind of what is called ghost newspapers, where the name is still there and the paper still exists, but it's a kind of a shadow of itself. And there's such a price to pay for democracy when this happens, because people get less politically engaged, they become more polarized. There's no one to watch government figures to make sure they're doing their jobs. And so there's a lot of downside to this. And I guess my feeling is I'm trying to kind of raise the alarm so that we can save this thing before it's too late.
I know myself, it's such a sad situation, because with revenue down, but now more than ever, I'm looking at the Buffalo News multiple times a day, because how else, we have some of our local radio too, but really it's such a great source of news. What was your approach with writing the book? Did you span across the country or focus on a few papers? How did you approach the?
So my publisher is at Columbia University, and the name of their imprint is Columbia Global Reports. So they did want me to take not only a national, but to some extent, sort of a worldwide view. So I just really tried to get a broad view of what was happening, mostly in the United States, but also in other parts of the world. And really, this is a problem that doesn't have any borders to it. It's happening everywhere, with some exceptions. So I did a lot of reporting. I went to various places, but it's also to some extent seen through the lens of my own experience in Buffalo, where I joined the Buffalo News as a summer intern right out of school, and then saw it in its heyday, managed a staff of 200 people, and then when the downturn came in 2008, we really had to pull in. And now that the coronavirus has caused such a huge disruption in our economy, we're saying, what could be for a lot of papers and other news organizations an extinction level event. So it's a very serious story, and I feel like it's a really important one. It's also one that's been like a moving target for me, because as I've been reporting and writing it, all this other, consolidation, mergers, bankruptcies, and now this situation that's just been within the past month or so, where, it's just the advertising world has now really dried up, where it had been really bad before. Now it's disastrous. So I've been trying to revise and catch up with everything.
Are there any, I don't know if good news might be the wrong word, but hope or models that you have discovered that might help to keep local journalism going?
Yes, all over the country, we're seeing nonprofit news organizations crop up. I mean, in some cases, a few cases, newspapers are being allowed to turn themselves into nonprofits. The Salt Lake Tribune just did that, but also places like Buffalo has Investigative Post. There's MinPost in Minneapolis. There's the Texas Tribune. These are digital startups that are funded through philanthropy and through events and other things like that. And they're much smaller usually, but they do show a lot of hope for the future. And meanwhile, there's a lot of people who are looking at newspapers and trying to see, is there any way we can shore them up? Obviously public funding comes with a lot of caution, because you really don't want political figures determining whether to fund someplace. And and so there's not sort of like one good answer. It has to be, if we're going to get through this, and we will, there has to be sort of a patchwork of different kinds of things. And, public radio is one piece of this. Television stations are definitely one piece of it. And actually Buffalo is quite fortunate, because it still has a good newspaper. It has a nonprofit. It has 3, broadcast affiliates and a cable channel, and it has public radio. So we're relatively lucky right now, but there's no guarantee that that will last into the future.
Well, on this note, our time is up for our talk now, but I'm going to say this is a pause, because I really look forward to continuing the conversation with you and Mark here in August in Larkin Square. And if that can't happen, we'll find a date in the fall. So no matter what, we will have this conversation, but I'm hoping we can have a socially distanced, wonderful event in a few months here. So meanwhile, Margaret, thank you so much for your time. Stay well. We look forward to welcoming you back to the Buffalo area when your travels bring you here this summer. And we really appreciate your time, and also just all the work you do for the benefit of your readers.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.